So the good news about the digestive system is that you're far more familiar with this system than you are perhaps the horns or the funiculi regions of the spinal cord. And I think you'll find this presentation to be very straightforward and maybe a few more things you'll learn about the digestive system, but we all can point to our stomach and our liver probably, and so we're not going to be quite as stressed out over this unit. That's the hope anyway, right? So let's take a look. We know what the digestive system does. It's going to ingest the food. That is, it's going to take the food into our body. It's going to transport that food from mouth to anus. Along the way, it's going to digest the food. That is, it's going to break it down into useful pieces. It's going to absorb those nutrients. It's going to then expel anything that it cannot use. There are two separate sets of organs that are involved with this system. Some are referred to as the actual digestive organs. And as you'll see, food literally travels through the center of these organs. And then there will be accessory digestive organs. These are organs that are contributing to the process in some meaningful way. Collectively, this is the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract, the digestive system, and you'll also hear it referred to in part as the alimentary canal. So what would aliment mean? Alimentary canal. Aliment must mean nourishment. Right? So this is your nourishing canal. It makes sense. So we've got here two sets of organs. On the left-hand side are the accessory digestive organs. These are going to contribute to the process. The ones on the right are the actual digestive organs through which food travels. Let's start first with the salivary glands and the accessory organs. So the salivary glands, there's three main pairs of salivary glands. There are the parotid glands. They're going to sit in your jaw, sort of underneath your masseter. These are the glands that historically would get very inflamed when someone had mumps. We don't see mumps much anymore, so most of you have never seen that big chipmunk look and very painful inflammation of the parotid glands. There are also the sublingual under the tongue and the submandibular under the mandible. And these glands are all secreting saliva. They do slightly different jobs. They're not identical. They're secreting digestive enzymes, but they're also secreting antimicrobial and antiviral factors. They're actually helping reduce bacterial numbers that could get into your body, helping reduce viral infections. They also secrete growth factors, and these growth factors help heal your mouth very, very quickly. So you know if you burn your tongue or cut your lip, it heals quickly, in part because it's epithelium, and we know epithelial cells divide and replace themselves quickly, but these growth factors also help to move the process along. This is why animals lick their wounds, why you should lick your wounds, and why let your dog lick your wounds, because they have the same growth factors that will speed up healing, so it's cleansing and healing your wounds, so go for it. Now, you've also got the teeth. Right? The teeth are obviously going to be masticating, chewing the food. And then there is this big old muscle, the tongue. Please learn how to spell the word tongue. I get some very, very interesting and very wrong spellings for this strange muscle. T-O-N-G-U-E. Doesn't look like it, I know, but that's tongue. Then we've got the liver. The liver is the largest abdominal pelvic organ in your body. It does many, 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 many things. It makes your blood cells. It's helping detoxify. But as far as nutrition goes, or at least digestion goes, I should say, we're going to just focus on the fact that the liver makes bile. And bile is a substance which helps you to digest fats and mixed fats for absorption into your body. The bile will then be released and stored in this little green pouch underneath the liver called the gallbladder. So it's going to store and concentrate the bile there. And then whenever you have eaten a fatty meal, signals will be sent to the gallbladder. The gallbladder will then squirt out a large amount of bile and help you digest that fatty meal. So basically, I think there's like a little GPS thing over the golden arches. So when you drive through McDonald's, the gallbladder goes squirt, right? And gives you a little extra bile. And then there's the pancreas. And the pancreas is hiding back here. And it is going to provide some digestive enzymes. You see it in white back there, kind of an off-white color back behind the stomach. and it's providing enzymes. It does a lot of other things as well. The pancreas is also where hormones like insulin are secreted from. So because the pancreas serves two very different functions, it secretes hormones. That makes it endocrine. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But it also secretes digestive enzymes that go into the gut. That makes it exocrine. So it is both exocrine and endocrine. So those are the accessory organs. As far as digestive organs themselves, food first enters into the oral cavity and then will be pushed back with the tongue to the pharynx. The pharynx is simply your anatomical throat, a name for the throat. And we'll talk about the pharynx a little bit more. Food will then travel down the esophagus. There'll be a break in the diaphragm that allows the esophagus to pass down. And what you can't see here is that the stomach kind of curves around a little bit like this, and the esophagus does a little bit of a turn, such that the esophagus now will drop the food into the stomach. The stomach will rock and roll and churn that food, add some acid, add some enzymes, break that food down. By the time the food leaves the stomach, it will now be in a pasty, liquidy substance called chyme. Okay, so the stomach is going to make chyme. That chyme is going to leave the stomach and enter into the small intestines. The small intestines are basically in the center of all this, the lighter colored pink. There's about 18 feet of those things in your body. And then once the food has been, or the chyme and the nutrients have been absorbed into the small intestine, then what's left will be packed into the large intestine, also called the colon. And there are 4 parts to the colon. Very easy. There's the ascending, and then across the transverse, down the descending, and then there's a sigmoidal curve, an S curve, if you will, in the sigmoidal colon. Then there is a short region that is straight in appearance. That's the rectum. We know rectus means straight. So then after the rectum, the straight portion, there's a very short anal canal. And then finally there's a double sphincter, a double muscle layer called the anus. And I'll tell you more about that in a few minutes. So those are the structures, right, through which food passes. And there's a few more details that we'll add into this conversation. But basically, you need to be able to follow, as you're eating lunch tomorrow, think about what's happening over the next 12 hours. Where is it heading? What sphincter, what gateway is it passing through from structure to structure to structure? And be able to imagine that during the next week. And by doing so, you'll be really, really well prepared for next week's quiz. Any questions on any of the structures at this point? The cecum, very good. So I'll come back to that. The very beginning of the large intestine, basically this pouch right here is called the cecum. It's the first part of the colon, the first part of the large intestine. And I didn't say it, but hanging off from the cecum is the appendix. So there's a little tiny worm-shaped appendix, and sometimes it'll be called the vermiform appendix. Vermi means worm. So a small worm-shaped appendix that hangs off there. Sometimes it gets inflamed. And when it gets inflamed, you got to get it taken out. And that can be an emergency. You don't want it to rupture. That appendix is full of bacteria from the gut. And those bacteria, if the gut were to explode, would set up a huge infection and can be very life-threatening. So you want to make sure you get that appendix. If it's inflamed and it's maybe going to, quote, rupture, you want to make sure you get it out before it ruptures. Once it ruptures, it's a major antibiotic, treatment to cure that infection. Anything else about the structures on that image? Okay, let's just make sure we go through a few more words together. So the GI tract, again, those organs include from the mouth, the oral cavity, through to the large intestine. You've got a continuous tube that's about 30 feet long. So imagine your guts spread out across the room. And when we do the fetal pigs today, you can actually start to appreciate the length of those intestines in the pig. Along the wall of the digestive tract, there are smooth muscles that are going to keep moving food through by sort of a rhythmic movement. And then, of course, we have those accessory organs that we've already described that while food does not directly pass through them, they are contributing in some meaningful way to the process. So again, let's just think about the functions a little bit. We've got ingestion, that is the taking in of food. That's pretty much voluntary, right? Then you got digestion, and there's two basic types of digestion, mechanical and chemical. So mechanical digestion would be the chewing, the mastication, the physical breakdown by the churning of the stomach. And then there's chemical digestion, which would bring in acid and enzymes from the stomach and other organs. Propulsion. So we're going to move these products through by two different methods. The first is peristalsis. Peristalsis is a rhythmic dance of the muscle layers, and it's going to keep a rippling motion going, and that's going to keep food and chyme moving along the pathway. Then there's also segmentation, as the name suggests. Little segments of the intestines sort of wall themselves off, and in that little area it becomes like a little blender, and there's a blending of the juices and the food products to help with the mixing. There's going to be secretion along the way. You're going to be secreting acid by the stomach. You'll be secreting bile by the liver and storing it in the gallbladder. You'll be putting out digestive juices by the salivary glands, by the stomach, by the pancreas. You'll also be releasing mucus or mucin. So there are lots of goblet cells along the way. You want a nice, moist gut, right? You don't want a dry, irritated gut. Along the way, you're going to be absorbing nutrients, both passively and actively, with and without ATP. And you'll be eliminating wastes through defecation. The timing of the movement of food through the body is really quite complex. There are a lot of hormones that I'm not going to be going into right now that you'll learn more about in Biology 106 that help to regulate the movement of food. You want that food to be moving through at just the right rate so that you're able to move the food through and absorb nutrients. Right? It's got to go slow enough through to absorb the nutrients, but if it goes too slow, then food starts rotting. The bacteria in your gut start creating gas and all the discomfort of bloating, and you have constipation. So kids die every year. People die from chronic diarrhea, right? They're eating, but everything's going through the body so quickly they're not absorbing nutrients. So diarrhea is not good, and constipation is not fun either, right? We don't want the food rotting in our gut and causing that, that buildup. If you would, please, please, please turn to your model inventory list for the digestive system. I think you'll find it around page 562. Tell me if I'm right about that page. 562 should be your long list of structures to know on the digestive model. And number 2 on that says alimentary canal. Sorry, the left says alimentary canal. Number 2 says the pharynx. Under the pharynx, there are only 2 structures listed, A and B, oro and laryngopharynx. Please add to your list this top word, nasopharynx. Now, Amerman is not wrong to not include this, but I want to have you add nasopharynx. Has nothing to do with digestion, but just for completeness right now, we'll have all 3 of these words now in our vocabulary. So let's understand what we have here in this picture. This is a mid-sagittal cut of the head, of the neck, and we've got food coming in through the lips, undergoing mastication by the teeth. Food comes into the oral cavity. This big muscle is the tongue. At the very back of the oral cavity, you have this area that's shown in pink called the oropharynx. Right? Oropharynx, oral throat, oropharynx. If we were instead air, you'd be coming up through the nostrils, up into the nasal passages, and in the very back of the nasal passages, shown in orange, is the nasopharynx. Right? Just a region that I wanted you to add. The nasopharynx and the oropharynx are going to merge into what's called in blue here the laryngopharynx. Okay, the larynx, the voice box, if you will. So you've got these 3 parts of the pharynx, basically the throat. Right? And this is a structure that is shared by your digestive system and by your respiratory system. If I were to ask you, Simon says, point to your esophagus, where would you point? Simon says, point to your esophagus. I see most of you pointing here, right? Which is what we would all do, but I want you to realize that by pointing there, the trachea is in front of the esophagus, and the esophagus runs way back here, right along your vertebra. So it would actually be more close to point to the back of your neck and say, there's my esophagus, right? Because literally it's closer to your vertebra and the back than it is to the front up by your sternum or your throat. We're going to be looking at one slide today under the microscope. And that is going to be of the duodenum, a section of the small intestine. And when you're looking at this section, there's a couple different magnifications over there already set up for you on the scopes. And you'll be turning over in your Amerman book to around page 564 to 570. It's on the board here to take a look at the histology while you're looking under the microscope. The food, right, the chyme, is traveling through the center of this intestine. Right, that's the lumen, right, the tube of the intestine. We see there's lots of wrinkles. Those wrinkles are going to increase the surface area. And what sort of epithelium would be lining the small intestine? We learned this back in Lab 3. What sort of epithelium did we see was involved with absorbing nutrients across the small intestine? Simple columnar. Very good. And associated with those simple columnar epithelia, we would find what modification? Not cilia, because cilia are moving things. And I told you that here it's the muscle that's moving stuff. Instead, to increase the surface area for absorption, we would find microvilli. Right? Can't see those under the microscope, but I assure you that they are there. So you have these, can you remember what it looked like? And you'll see it again in a picture. These layers of long, tall cells, right, lining the intestine. Now, once the nutrients are, quote, absorbed into the small intestine, where do those nutrients go? Into the bloodstream, right? So that means that right underneath this epithelium, there must be a connective tissue layer. We know that's true. And right underneath in that connective tissue layer, it's kind of showing purpley lilac here. And that layer, there's a lot of blood vessels in here. And those blood vessels are going to be absorbing, right, those nutrients. Then we see a double layer of muscle. Right? There's two layers of muscle. One layer is longitudinal, that is, it's going along the long axis of the intestine. The other layer is circular. Those two layers are working together to do that peristaltic rhythmic dance, pushing food through the gut. Then lastly, what is surrounding the outside of your intestines? Lab 1, day 1. All of the organs in your abdominal pelvic cavity have what lining them or touching them, covering them? Visceral peritoneum. The abdominal pelvic wall would have parietal peritoneum, and your gut and your stomach would have visceral peritoneum. So, in honor of what we know about this, there are 4 names for these layers of the intestine. The inside layer, where you have the epithelium, that layer is the mucosa, because remember that epithelium is a mucous membrane. Remember, a mucous membrane means that it's a membrane that has access to the outside world. And while it wouldn't be very comfortable, someone can take their finger, right, and touch all of your GI tract from mouth to anus. Not very comfortable, but it could happen, right? It has access to the outside world. It's a mucous membrane. Then right below that epithelium, right below the mucosa, there is a layer of blood vessels that is in what's called the submucosa. So the mucosa is where the food is, submucosa just below that. The muscle layer that is pushing things through by peristalsis, it's the muscle layer, and throw a little Latin on the end, the muscularis. And then finally, in honor of the serous membrane that we know is lining the outside of the gut, that layer is called the serosa. So I just need you to know the 4 layers. Mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, serosa. And when you look at the scope, you'll see those layers, and your histology in your book will help you with that. And that's really what you're after over there. identifying the 4 layers of the intestine. So that means, so far, for lab exam number 2, you have 3 slides that you need to be able to recognize when you see them again. Last week we looked at neurons under the microscope, and we looked at the cross-section of the spinal cord. If you can picture those in your mind, now we're adding to it a cross-section of the intestine. The stomach. Just a couple more structures about the stomach that I want you to be aware of. So on the screen, we got the top of the screen, that big white thing going across the top of the room. That would sort of represent what structure, what muscle? Let me make it more clear. So, right, if this was this picture, this big black line I'm drawing would represent what muscle? The diaphragm. That's what I was trying to say. So across the top of the screen, that white bar would be the diaphragm. Food is coming down from upstairs, right, down a pipe, and that pipe is the esophagus. It's going to break through the diaphragm, and the esophagus is going to dump kerplunk into the stomach. Now, right before the food goes into the stomach, there is a sphincter internally. You can't see it here, but there's a circular muscle group that closes down. That sphincter has 3 different names, just to confuse us. Your book names it the gastroesophageal sphincter. It is commonly also called the lower esophageal sphincter, and some books will call it the cardiac sphincter. Okay, I think 2 of them are listed in your book. When you look at your list, would you agree with me, Emily?
Yeah.
Gastroesophageal and lower esophageal are listed, and next to it on your list or somewhere write cardiac. Now, the reason it's called the cardiac sphincter is that the first part of the stomach, right around here, where food first drops into the stomach, is, for reasons I'm not sure, called the cardiac region. It does sort of face the heart, but other than that, I don't know why they would have chosen that word to describe the cardiac, or part of the stomach. The stomach has a fundus. The fundus would be the dome of the stomach. The majority of the stomach is simply called the body. Throughout the body and throughout the stomach, you'll find on the inner surface of the stomach these deep grooves. Those are called here the gastric folds. They're also referred to as rugae, and that is listed in your list. Rugae, gastric folds. Toward the bottom of the stomach, there's a region called the pylorus. And as that chyme has been formed, that chyme will now leave through this sphincter. That sphincter is the pyloric sphincter. As it opens, chyme now can go into the first part of the large intestine, and the first part of the large intestine is called the duodenum. Duodenum or duodenum. Now notice that the stomach does not have 2 layers of smooth muscle, but instead 3. So there is still the longitudinal layer that goes the length of the stomach. There is still the circular layer that goes around the muscle, around the stomach, but there's an additional oblique layer on the inside. And now you've got 3 layers of muscles that can really rock and roll and churn and keep that food really churning around, mixing it with the acid and the enzymes. Some little boys are born with I shouldn't say little boys. Some babies are born with a blockage of the pyloric sphincter. That is called pyloric stenosis. Okay? stenosis, pyloric stenosis. And it's not uncommon. I've heard it's 1 to 2% of some newborns, more common in boys. But the baby goes home, all is well. But every time the baby is taking breast or bottle, it's projectile vomiting. And it's basically because it can't go anywhere. The food can't get past the stomach. And so the baby's losing weight. It's not really getting its nutrients. And they go in now and they kind of wiggle open that sphincter and all as well. Pretty routine. Okay, so that's the stomach. A couple of extra features about it. And again, you'll be looking at this list as you go through your list of structures. You're not going to have to look at the stomach under the microscope But if you did, it's the same layers that we have in the intestine. The difference is this. So if I take a little chunk out of the stomach and I see those deep gastric folds or those rugae, right, what we see is that those rugae go really deep. And these are called the gastric pits. And lining those pits are epithelial cells that are making the acid and making the enzymes for digestion. All of that, all of those epithelial cells and everything associated with it is collectively the mucosa, right, the mucous membrane. Then, just below it, some blood vessels. There's the submucosa. And then, not 2, but 3 layers of muscle, the muscularis. And then finally, the stomach also has a serous membrane around it, so we call it the serosa. Okay, so just the same layers over and over and over. We'll see these same layers when we look at the bladder, when we look at the urethra. We'll see these same layers over and over again. So get this little mantra down, right? Mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, serosa. That's all I'm going to share right now about the digestive system. In a moment, you're going to start going through that list of structures. You each have a long digestive model in front of you, and you will work through it. I'll find one. It's over there, behind the microscopes. And you'll work through this step by step, and then probably in about 25 to 30 minutes, if that much time, I'll come in and I'll make sure that you're really good with everything on the model. I'll go through the whole list. The other thing we're doing today, in addition to learning our digestive structures and looking at the histology, this is our endocrine lab. Now, we're not doing anything with hormones, but I do want you to know the anatomical placement of the hormone-secreting glands in your body. So, let's make sure we've all got this page marked. This image on the screen right now is found in your book on or about 636. Would you confirm that for me? Somewhere around 636, you'll find this image that's up on the screen. And there's about 12 or 10 glands that I want you to know where they're found on the body. I want you to put a little star by 3 of these. Put a little star right now by the pineal gland. You can do this on your PowerPoint or on the page 636. But the pineal gland, go down to the parathyroid gland. Mark that one as well. And then mark the thymus. So the pineal gland up in the brain, the parathyroid gland found in the throat, and the thymus found down in the thoracic cavity. Put a star or mark those 3, and then somewhere on that page put little star equals not seen on our models. So you cannot find the pineal gland, the parathyroid gland, or the thymus on the models that we have here in the lab. I still want you to know those 3 based upon the picture, but you don't have to worry about finding them on the models. What we have over here, behind Jordan on the table, there are some assorted models. We don't have one model that represents all of the endocrine organs. But we have a brain over here. And last week you were able to find the pituitary gland hanging off and the hypothalamus. We've got a little trachea on a stick here. And there's a part of a thyroid gland around there, but you cannot find a parathyroid gland. Parathyroid gland usually on the dorsal side. On the back side of the thyroid, they just did not, for some reason, include them on this model. We've got a nice picture, a model of 2 kidneys with the adrenal gland sitting on the top and a big pancreas driving between the 2. And we've got a model of a little girl with ovaries and a little boy with testes. So basically we have all of those glands that are up there on the screen, minus the pineal, parathyroid, and thymus for you to identify on those models. So in the next 25 minutes or so, make sure you take a look at the microscope. Make sure you take a quick look at the models of endocrine structures. Next week, the quiz will be of 2 parts, really. It'll be a fill-in-the-blank quiz, and I'll go over that with you in a few minutes over the flow of food through the digestive system. But it will also be you're walking over to the endocrine models or you're walking over to the digestive model, and I will have put stickers on the model, and you'll be identifying that structure. So from now on, we'll do a lot of that. During our quizzes, it'll be more get up and go to a portion of the room. And that's going to help you also get ready for the second lab practical, because I'll be putting stickers on the same things that you'll need to know for the lab practical. So that will help you with sort of predicting what's coming on the lab practical. Okay? Any questions for me over digestive or endocrine at this time? Okay, very good. Spread out, do that, and I'll be here to help you.